I'm Sophia Taylor, 26 years old, and I just got served legal papers in the middle of my workday. My hands trembled as I read the lawsuit. The plaintiffs, James and Rachel Taylor, my parents who I haven't seen in 22 years. They're demanding the entire $2.7 million inheritance my beloved Grandpa Richard left me after his passing last month. My mind flashed back to being 4 years old, watching them drive away from my grandparents' house, my small suitcase beside me. They never came back. Until now. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stick around, because if you've ever wondered what it feels like when the people who were supposed to love you only come back for your money, my story might help you recognize the wolves in your own life. My earliest memories of life with my parents are fragmented like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that don't quite fit together. I remember my father, James, tall with dark hair and a smile that appeared whenever he won at poker. My mother, Rachel, was beautiful with honey blonde hair and a laugh that could light up a room when she wasn't lost in the fog of whatever pills she had taken. We lived in a small apartment that constantly changed when rent couldn't be paid. By the time I was 3, I'd already called 5 different places home. My father's gambling addiction meant money disappeared as quickly as it arrived. My mother's substance abuse made her present physically, but absent in all the ways that mattered. There were happy moments. I remember my mother singing while brushing my hair, and my father teaching me card tricks. But those bright spots were swimming in a sea of neglect. I learned to make my own breakfast at 3 pouring cereal and sometimes cleaning up spilled milk before anyone noticed. I remember hiding when strange loud men came to our apartment demanding money from my father. I remember my mother sleeping through entire days impossible to wake. The day they left me, it started like any other. My father packed my small pink suitcase, telling me I was going for a special visit to Grandpa Richard and Grandma Martha's house. I was excited. My grandparents always had cookies and never yelled. My mother seemed distant, avoiding eye contact as she buckled me into the car seat. When we arrived, my father carried my suitcase to the door. Grandma Martha hugged me tightly while Grandpa Richard had a tense conversation with my father on the porch. I remember my mother kissing my forehead quickly before hurrying back to the car. "We'll see you soon, Soph," my father called out, but something in his voice didn't sound right. "When are Mommy and Daddy coming back?" I asked Grandma as their car disappeared down the tree-lined street. "Soon, sweetheart. They just need to sort some things out," she replied, but her eyes were sad. Days turned into weeks. Every afternoon I sat by the living room window waiting for their car to appear. Weeks turned into months. My 4th birthday came and went. No visit, just a card with a Mickey Mouse on it and a promise to see me real soon. 3 months after they left me, the phone rang during dinner. Grandpa answered, his expression darkening as he listened. I remember him saying firmly, "You can't just abandon your child, James," before hanging up. That night I overheard them talking in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. "They're not coming back, Martha Grandpa," said his voice breaking. "They've moved to California. James said they're starting fresh, without any baggage, their word, not mine." "That poor child," Grandma whispered. "How could they?" The next morning, they sat me down and explained that I would be living with them from now on. Grandpa had already contacted a lawyer about getting custody. The court proceedings were confusing for a 4-year-old. I remember being asked questions by a nice lady who let me hold her fuzzy pen. My parents didn't show up for the hearing. The judge granted my grandparents legal guardianship, and just like that, I officially became theirs. The nights were the hardest. I had nightmares where I was lost in a store calling for my parents who walked away without looking back. I developed separation anxiety, screaming whenever Grandma tried to leave me at preschool. I was terrified everyone would eventually abandon me too. "I'm not going anywhere, little one," Grandpa would promise, holding me through the tears. Not ever. I didn't understand then that while losing my parents broke something in me, it saved me too. In their absence, I found the stable, loving home every child deserves. Life with my grandparents was structured and secure, 2 things I'd never known before. Their modest 2-story colonial house in Springfield became my sanctuary. My bedroom, once their guest room, was transformed with lavender walls and butterfly decals. For the first time, I had a space that was truly mine and wouldn't be packed up at a moment's notice. Grandpa Richard wasn't rich back then. His wealth came later through decades of smart investments. He had started as a factory floor worker and worked his way up to management through sheer determination. By the time I came to live with them, he was operations director at a manufacturing company respected for his fair leadership and innovative problem solving. Always remember, Sophia, he would tell me your integrity is worth more than any dollar amount. Grandma Martha had been an elementary school teacher before retiring. She approached my trauma with patience drawn from years of helping troubled children. When I refused to sleep alone, she set up a sleeping bag in my room and gradually moved it farther from my bed each night until I could sleep independently. When other children asked where my parents were, she helped me practice responses. I live with my grandparents who love me very much. The first day of kindergarten, I clung to Grandma's skirt, petrified. "What if you don't come back for me?" I whispered. She knelt down, meeting my eyes. "Sophia Taylor, I will always come back for you. Always. I'll be sitting right here when school ends with your favorite chocolate chip cookies." And she was that day, and every day. School became my place to shine. Without the chaos of my early years, I thrived academically. Grandpa helped with math homework at the kitchen table using real-world examples from his business experience. Grandma read with me every night, doing different voices for each character. For my 7th birthday, a card arrived from California with $20 inside. "Missing you, kiddo. Love Mom and Dad," it read in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it for hours, tracing the letters with my finger. Cards came sporadically after that Christmas, sometimes birthdays until they stopped altogether when I was 10. When I was 8, my parents showed up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the backyard with Grandpa planting tomatoes when Grandma called us inside with a tight expression. They looked different. My father had gained weight, his once sharp jawline softened. My mother's hair was darker, cut in a short style I didn't recognize. They brought a teddy bear that was too young for me. "Look how big you've gotten, Princess," my father said awkwardly. I stood frozen, unsure whether to hug them or hide behind Grandpa. The visit lasted barely 30 minutes before the true purpose emerged. They needed money, $15,000 for a business opportunity. Grandpa took them into his study while Grandma distracted me with cookie baking. Their voices grew louder until my father stormed out, my mother trailing behind. "You'll regret this, Richard," my father snapped. "She's our daughter, not yours." "You gave up that right when you abandoned her," Grandpa responded, his usually gentle voice steel hard. "Don't come back unless it's for Sophia, not her bank account." They left without saying goodbye. I pretended to be focused on measuring flour, but inside I was shattered all over again. They hadn't come for me. They'd come for what I could give them. That night I cried in Grandma's arms. "Why don't they want me?" I asked. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, stroking my hair. "Their hearts are sick in a way medicine can't fix. But mine and Grandpa's hearts are full of love for you. You will always, always be enough for us." As years passed, my grandparents became my true north. Grandpa taught me to fish, change a tire, and calculate compound interest. Grandma showed me how to cook family recipes, tend a garden, and stand up for myself with grace. They came to every school play, every soccer game, every academic awards ceremony. They built the childhood I might never have had otherwise. When I was 12, Grandma started forgetting things small at first, like where she put her glasses, then bigger things like doctor's appointments. By my 13th birthday, we had a diagnosis: early onset Alzheimer's. My secure world began to fracture again. My teenage years arrived with the rebellious energy most parents dread, but mine was complicated by Grandma Martha's declining health. While other girls my age were experimenting with makeup and crushing on boys, I was learning to help Grandma remember to take her medications and gently redirect her when she became confused. I excelled academically, channeling my complicated emotions into schoolwork, where results were predictable and success measurable. My English teacher, Miss, Winters recognized my talent for writing and encouraged me to enter essay contests. Math came naturally. Grandpa's lessons had given me a solid foundation. By sophomore year, I was taking advanced placement classes and dreaming of college. Meanwhile, Grandma's condition deteriorated rapidly. Some days she knew me. Other days she called me by my mother's name. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I was now being forgotten by another mother figure, though this time not by choice. When I was 14, Grandma needed full-time care. Grandpa refused to consider a nursing home. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, he'd say, quoting their wedding vows. We hired a daytime nurse, Mrs. Patel, but nights were our responsibility. I learned to change adult diapers and prevent bed sores, skills no teenager should have to master. During this period, Grandpa Richard became my rock. At 67, he postponed his retirement to cover medical expenses, working long hours, before coming home to care for his wife of 45 years. Yet he never missed my school events, arriving, sometimes still in his work clothes, always with a proud smile. Late nights became our special time. After settling Grandma, we'd sit at the kitchen table with mugs of hot chocolate, talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories of his youth, his business challenges, how he met Grandma at a USO dance during his military service. She was the prettiest girl in the room, he'd recall, eyes distant with memory. I couldn't believe she chose me. She chose well, I'd tell him, reaching for his weathered hand. When I was 15, Grandma Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small, just us, some neighbors, and Grandma's surviving friends. No call or card came from my parents. Grief settled over our house like a heavy blanket. Grandpa moved through it with quiet dignity, but I heard him crying at night. I began skipping school, my grades slipping as depression took hold. The school counselor recommended therapy, which Grandpa immediately arranged, despite the additional expense. Dr. Lena Thompson became my lifeline. A no-nonsense therapist with kind eyes, she helped me process not only Grandma's death but the original abandonment that had shaped my life. You carry two separate griefs, she explained. The loss of the parents who left and the grandmother who would never have left by choice. They require different healing. Slowly, I rebuilt myself, rejoined the debate team, brought my grades back up. Grandpa and I developed new routines: Sunday morning, pancakes, Friday night movies, weekend car restoration projects in the garage with his antique Mustang. For my high school graduation, I was named valedictorian. Standing at the podium, I saw Grandpa in the audience, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. I dedicated my speech to him and Grandma for showing me that family is built on love, not obligation. That evening, as we celebrated at my favorite restaurant, my phone rang with an unfamiliar California number. Stepping outside to answer, I heard my mother's voice for the first time in nearly a decade. "Congratulations, Sophia," she said, sounding nervous. "Your father and I saw the announcement in the Springfield Gazette online." My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. "Thank you," I managed. "We've been thinking about you," she continued. "We're in a better place now. Financially, I mean. We could help with college expenses." "Grandpa has it covered," I replied automatically. "Oh." A pause. "Richard always was good with money. Listen, if you ever need anything—" "Where were you?" the words burst from me. "All these years. Grandma died. Did you know that? Where were you?" Silence stretched between us. Then, "We made mistakes, Sophia. Terrible ones. But we're still your parents." "Biology doesn't make you parents," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I don't need your money now that you think I might be worth something." I hung up and returned to the table, hands shaking. "Everything okay?" Grandpa asked, concern lining his face. "Wrong number," I lied, not wanting to ruin our celebration. That night I told him the truth. His expression darkened momentarily before he pulled me into a hug. "You handled it perfectly," he assured me. "Your grandma would be so proud of the young woman you've become." As we prepared for my college journey, Grandpa sat me down for a serious talk. "I'm setting up a trust for your education," he explained. "Your grandmother and I always wanted you to have every opportunity. I protested, knowing his retirement funds weren't infinite, but he was adamant. "My Sophia," he said with a smile that crinkled his eyes. "You are my legacy, the best investment I'll ever make." I left for State University that fall, my heart both heavy at leaving him alone and excited for my future. Neither of us could have predicted how quickly that future would collide with the past I'd tried so hard to outrun. My freshman year at State University brought freedom and challenges in equal measure. I'd chosen to major in business administration with a minor in finance inspired by Grandpa's career and our many discussions about his work. The campus was only a 2-hour drive from home, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to forge my own path. While other freshmen struggled with homesickness or went wild with newfound independence, I approached college with the discipline I'd learned from Grandpa. My scholarship covered tuition but required maintaining a 3.5 gigapascals, so partying took a backseat to studying. I found my tribe in the entrepreneurship club and secured a work-study position in the business department office. Every Friday afternoon, I'd drive home, arriving just as Grandpa was finishing dinner preparations. We established a new tradition: Friday night business meetings, as he jokingly called them. Over home-cooked meals, we'd discuss my classes, his work, and current economic trends. He'd challenge my textbook theories with real-world examples from his 5 decades in business. "That's the problem with academics," he'd say, twirling spaghetti on his fork. "They teach you formulas without factoring in human nature. Always remember that behind every business decision is a person with fears, dreams, and blind spots." After dinner, we'd retreat to his study where the walls were lined with business books and framed certificates. There, Grandpa began my real education, sharing his investment portfolio, explaining his decision-making process, and revealing the wealth he'd quietly accumulated through disciplined saving and strategic investments. "I started with $20 a month when your grandma and I were first married," he confided, showing me yellowed ledger books he'd kept since 1968. "Even when things were tight, we never touched our investment account." I was astonished to discover that my modest grandfather, who still used coupons and drove a 10-year-old car, had amassed a significant fortune, over $2 million in diversified investments, plus the mortgage-free house and his retirement accounts. "Why live so frugally when you could afford more?" I asked one night. His answer was pure, Grandpa. "Richard, wealth isn't for showing off Sophia, it's for security and creating opportunity. Besides," he added with a wink, "the more quietly you build wealth, the fewer people come asking for handouts." That comment made more sense later when he revealed that my parents had approached him for loans multiple times over the years, not just the incident I'd witnessed as a child. Sophomore year, we started a new weekend ritual, restoring his 1,965 Mustang that had been sitting in the garage since Grandma's diagnosis. I'd never been particularly mechanical, but Grandpa was patient, teaching me how each component worked before we tackled repairs. The car became a metaphor for the lessons he most wanted to impart. "See this engine," he'd say. "Previous owner neglected regular maintenance, thinking he was saving money. Ended up costing 10 times more to fix. Same with your finances and relationships. Neglect the small problems and they become big, expensive ones." During these grease-covered sessions, our conversations often turned philosophical. Grandpa had lived through the loss of his own parents, the devastation of watching his wife fade away, and the heartbreak of seeing his only son abandon his child. Yet bitterness hadn't consumed him. "How did you forgive my father?" I asked one Saturday as we replaced brake pads. "Your own son." Grandpa was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he sat back on his work stool, wiping his hands on a rag. "Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it, Sophia. It's about refusing to carry their mistakes as your burden. I forgave James and Rachel not because they earned it, but because anger would have made me a bitter guardian for you." He looked at me directly. "That said, forgiving doesn't mean allowing someone to keep hurting you. There's a difference between forgiveness and foolishness." My junior year, I landed a prestigious summer internship with Fisher Financial Group in Boston. When I called Grandpa with the news, his pride was palpable even over the phone. Martha would be turning cartwheels, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That summer apart was difficult. I called him daily, worried about him being alone. His reassurances didn't completely ease my concern, especially when he mentioned feeling a bit more tired than usual during our conversations. When I returned for senior year, the changes in him were subtle but unmistakable. At 71, Grandpa Richard moved more slowly, napped more frequently, and sometimes lost his train of thought mid-sentence. He dismissed my concerns, blaming normal aging, but agreed to a checkup after weeks of my gentle persistence. The diagnosis was early-stage heart failure, treatable but serious. The doctor prescribed medications and lifestyle changes, emphasizing the importance of reducing stress and physical exertion. That evening, as we sat on the porch swing that had been Grandma's favorite spot, Grandpa brought up his will for the first time. I've updated everything he said, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Henry Blackwell is still my attorney. Good man, known him 40 years. He'll handle everything when the time comes. Don't talk like that, I protested. The doctor said with proper care. I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, he interrupted gently. But ignoring reality doesn't change it. I want you prepared. He took my hand, his once strong grip now frailer. Everything goes to you, Sophia. You're my only heir. I don't care about the money, I said, tears threatening. I know you don't. That's exactly why you're the right one to have it. He squeezed my hand. Just promise you'll use it for a life that makes you happy. That's all Martha and I ever wanted for you. As I prepared to return to campus for my final semester, Grandpa made a comment that seemed odd at the time. When I'm gone, he said, helping carry my bags to the car, they'll come crawling back like they always do when they smell money. Who? I asked, confused. His expression darkened momentarily. Just remember what I taught you about wolves in sheep's clothing, Sophia. Not everyone who calls you family has your best interests at heart. I hugged him goodbye, not realizing those cryptic words were a warning about the storm that would follow his death, or that our time together was growing shorter than either of us imagined. Graduation day arrived under a perfect blue May sky. As I sat among rows of black-capped peers, I scanned the crowd until I spotted him Grandpa Richard in his best suit, the one he'd worn to my high school graduation and Grandma's funeral. Despite his doctor's concerns about his heart condition, he'd insisted on making the 2-hour drive to see me receive my diploma. When the dean called my name, Sophia Taylor, summa cum laude, Grandpa stood and applauded with such enthusiasm that several people around him smiled. That moment crystallized everything I wasn't just achieving for myself, but for the man who had given me a second chance at family. After the ceremony, as we celebrated at a nearby restaurant, Grandpa presented me with Grandma's pearl necklace. She wanted you to have this when you graduated college, he explained, voice thick with emotion. Said pearls were for ladies who'd earned them. With trembling fingers, I fastened the clasp around my neck. I wish she could have been here. She sees you, Sophia, he said with conviction. I believe that with every fiber of my being. 2 weeks later, I started my first professional position as a junior financial analyst at Wexler Consulting in Springfield. The salary wasn't exceptional, but the location was perfect, just 15 minutes from Grandpa's house. I found a small apartment nearby, but spent most evenings with him monitoring his health and savoring our time together. Grandpa took immense pride in my independence. Look at you, he'd say. 22, and already navigating the professional world like you were born for it. His health, however, continued its gradual decline. Some mornings he struggled to button his shirts. Some evenings he'd fall asleep mid-conversation. When he began forgetting to take his medications, I implemented a pill organizer system and daily check-in calls. 6 months into my new job, I met Michael Donovan at a young professionals networking event. Tall with kind eyes and an easy laugh, he worked in software development for a local tech company. Our first date stretched from coffee into dinner as conversation flowed effortlessly. By our third date, I was comfortable enough to explain my unusual family situation. My parents abandoned me when I was 4, I told him over dinner. My grandfather raised me alone after my grandmother died. Instead of awkward pity, Michael shared that his mother had died when he was 12, leaving his father to raise 3 children alone. Not the same, but I understand complicated family dynamics, he said, reaching for my hand across the table. When I finally introduced Michael to Grandpa, I was nervous Grandpa had become protective since my parents' brief reappearance after high school graduation. But they connected immediately over a shared love of classic cars and baseball. "He's a good one," Grandpa whispered when Michael stepped out to take a work call. "Looks at you like you hung the moon." As our relationship deepened, Michael began helping with Grandpa's care. He'd accompany us to doctor appointments, taking notes while I asked questions. He researched heart failure treatments and suggested a different specialist when Grandpa's condition worsened despite medication adjustments. "You don't have to do all this," I told Michael one night as we washed dishes after dinner at Grandpa's. "Family helps family," he replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. 9 months into my job at Wexler, I received an unexpected promotion after identifying a significant error in a client's financial projections. The increased responsibility came with better pay, and my own office, a glass-walled space overlooking the city park. Grandpa insisted on seeing it arriving with a small potted fern for my desk. "Every office needs something green," he declared, surveying my space with undisguised pride. That same week, disaster struck. I was in a client meeting when Michael called repeatedly. Grandpa had collapsed while getting the mail. By the time I reached Springfield Memorial Hospital, he was in the cardiac unit, wires and tubes connecting him to beeping machines. "Myocardial infarction," the doctor explained. "A significant heart attack. We've stabilized him, but there's extensive damage." For 3 days, I barely left his side, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, leaving only when Michael forced me to shower and change. When Grandpa finally opened his eyes, his first words were, "Don't you have work to do, young lady?" Even facing mortality, he remained himself, practical, selfless, and concerned about my future above all else. The recovery was slow and partial. After 2 weeks in the hospital, Grandpa returned home with significantly reduced stamina and strict limitations. The cardiologist was blunt. His heart was functioning at barely 40% capacity. Another heart attack would likely be fatal. I took family leave from work and temporarily moved back into my childhood bedroom. Though Grandpa protested, I knew he needed full-time care. Michael helped when he could, staying overnight sometimes, so I could sleep without worrying. "You should hire professional help," Michael suggested after Grandpa had a particularly difficult night. "This isn't sustainable for you alone." He was right. After researching options, I hired Nurse Katie, a no-nonsense yet compassionate home health nurse who came daily from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Her presence allowed me to return to work part-time while ensuring Grandpa received proper care. Katie quickly became more than an employee. She brought homemade banana bread because Grandpa mentioned it was his favorite, found big band records at garage sales for his collection, and texted me updates throughout the day. More importantly, Grandpa trusted her, which allowed him to maintain some dignity despite his increasing dependence. "She reminds me of your grandmother," he confided. "Doesn't take any guff, but has a heart of gold." One evening, as autumn painted the trees in fiery colors, I was helping Grandpa organize his medication when the house phone rang, a number I didn't recognize with a California area code. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Richard Taylor's residence?" A man's voice vaguely familiar. "Who's calling?" I countered. A pause. "It's James. His son. My father." My stomach clenched as I glanced at Grandpa, who was watching me intently. "What do you want?" I asked, voice cooler than the October air outside. "I heard Dad's been sick. Neighbor of his contacted us on Facebook." His voice softened. "How is he?" "Since when do you care?" The words escaped before I could stop them. "He's my father, Sophia." "And I was your daughter," I replied evenly. That didn't seem to matter much. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked, "Is it serious? His condition?" Something in his tone raised my suspicions. 22 years of absence. And now this sudden concern, coinciding with Grandpa's failing health. Why the interest now? James the First deliberately used his first name. Let me guess, wondering about your inheritance potential. That's not fair, he protested, but weakly. Neither was abandoning your 4-year-old, I replied. If you actually care, send a card. Otherwise, don't call again. I hung up, hands shaking. Your father, Grandpa, asked, though he clearly already knew. I nodded, sinking into the chair beside him, suddenly concerned about your health. Grandpa's mouth tightened. Some people only value what they can take, Sophia. Remember that. They see relationships as transactions. His words proved prophetic sooner than either of us could have imagined. Winter arrived with unusual bitterness that year. As December's short days and long nights enveloped our small town, Grandpa's health deteriorated further. Each morning I'd check on him before leaving for work, finding him increasingly frail, despite Nurse Katie's excellent care and my evening attentions. The week before Christmas, he insisted on sitting in his workshop to wrap my gift without prying eyes, he'd said with a wink. When I heard a crash from that direction, I rushed in to find him on the floor, struggling to breathe, his skin ashen. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but somehow I knew this was different from his previous episodes. In the sterile brightness of the emergency room, the doctor confirmed my fears, another massive heart attack, this one catastrophic. We can make him comfortable, she said gently, but his heart is simply too damaged. They moved him to a private room where Michael and Katie joined us. In moments of consciousness, Grandpa would squeeze my hand, sometimes murmuring fragments of memories or instructions. Registration. Mustang. Needs transferred, he managed once. Don't worry about that now, I soothed, stroking his papery hand. His eyes clouded with medication, but suddenly urgent, locked onto mine. Henry has everything. Papers. Trust you. I know, Grandpa, I assured him. I trust Henry, too. He shook his head weakly, frustrated at being misunderstood. No, I trust you with everything. In the early hours of December 22nd, with my hand in his and Michael keeping silent vigil in the corner chair, Grandpa Richard took his final breath. The room fell quiet except for the gentle winter rain patting against the window as if the world itself were weeping for this good man. The following days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Michael became my anchor, handling calls and visitors when grief overwhelmed me. Katie organized meals and cleaned Grandpa's house, refusing payment. He was family to me, too, she insisted, tears in her usually stoic eyes. We planned a small service, just close friends and neighbors who had known Grandpa Richard and his generous spirit. The funeral home was arranging flowers when the director approached me with an uncomfortable expression. Miss Taylor, there's a couple asking about the service details. They say they're the deceased's son and daughter-in-law. My parents had arrived in Springfield. They looked older than I remembered from that brief visit when I was 8, my father's hair now salt and pepper, my mother's face lined despite obvious cosmetic efforts. They stood awkwardly in the funeral home lobby, dressed in expensive but somber clothes that seemed newly purchased. Sophia, my mother said, stepping forward with arms outstretched as if expecting a hug. I remained still, and her arms dropped. You look so grown up. Why are you here? I asked, conscious of Michael's protective presence beside me. He was my father, replied, echoing his words from our phone conversation. We have a right to say goodbye. I wanted to argue to remind him of the decades of absence, but Grandpa's voice seemed to whisper in my mind. Don't let anger make your decisions, Sophia. The service is tomorrow at 11, I said flatly. Please respect that this is a difficult time and keep your distance from me. They attended the funeral sitting in the back row while I delivered a eulogy highlighting Grandpa's integrity, generosity, and unconditional love. I didn't acknowledge their presence, focusing instead on the genuine mourners who had actually been part of his life. 3 days after the funeral, Henry Blackwell, Grandpa's attorney and friend of 40 years, requested a meeting at his downtown office. I arrived with Michael for moral support. Surprised to find my parents already seated in the conference room. What are they doing here? I asked Henry directly. The elderly attorney adjusted his glasses. Richard anticipated they might appear after his passing and left specific instructions about handling the matter. My parents exchanged glances that sent warning signals through my system. Henry began the formal reading of the will, his measured voice detailing standard legal phrases until reaching the distribution of assets. I, Richard Allen Taylor, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all my property, both real and personal, including all financial accounts, investments, and the property at 427 Maple Street, to my granddaughter Sophia Elizabeth Taylor. My father shifted in his seat, lips pressed into a thin line. Henry continued to my son James Richard Taylor and his wife Rachel Ann. Taylor, I leave the sum of $1 each, which represents the value they placed on their daughter when they abandoned her at age 4. The room fell silent. My mother's face flushed crimson. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest. "This is ridiculous," my father finally said. "I'm his only child. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Henry replied calmly. Richard was quite clear about his intentions. Henry then handed me an envelope. "Richard asked that you read this privately." Later, alone in my apartment, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your grandmother. Don't grieve too long. We had a wonderful journey together. The money and property are practical matters easily addressed through legal documents. But my true legacy to you isn't measured in dollars. It's the knowledge that you are worthy of love, capable of resilience, and destined for a meaningful life. Your parents may challenge this will. James has always felt entitled to what he didn't earn. Be prepared, be strong, but don't let bitterness consume you. That would be their final victory. Use this inheritance wisely. Not just the money, but the lessons we shared. Remember that wealth creates both opportunity and obligation. Make at least one life better because you passed through this world. I couldn't have loved you more had you been born of my own child. In all the ways that matter, you were my daughter. With eternal love, Grandpa Richard." Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter. In that moment, I felt both profoundly alone and deeply connected to the man who had shaped my life. The next morning, Henry called. "Sophia, I wanted to warn you. Your parents' attorney has contacted me. They're contesting the will." "On what grounds?" I asked, stomach sinking. "Undue influence. They're claiming you manipulated Richard in his vulnerable state to secure the inheritance." The irony was almost laughable. I, who had devoted years to Grandpa's care, accused of manipulation by those who had abandoned us both. "What happens now?" I asked. "They've filed a formal lawsuit." "This will get ugly before it's over," Henry warned. "Are you prepared for that?" Remembering Grandpa's letter, I straightened my spine. Yes, Grandpa expected this fight. I won't let him down. What I couldn't have anticipated was just how vicious that fight would become, or how it would force me to confront the deepest wounds of my childhood all over again. The lawsuit landed like a grenade in my carefully constructed life. Official court documents named me as defendant in Taylor v. Taylor, with my parents claiming I had systematically isolated and unduly influenced my grandfather during his final years to redirect his estate away from natural heirs. Reading their allegations felt like being slapped repeatedly, each fabrication more outrageous than the last. They portrayed themselves as loving parents temporarily separated from their child due to economic hardship, claiming they had maintained regular contact throughout my childhood. According to their narrative, I had deliberately poisoned Grandpa Richard against them, preventing reconciliation. The $2.7 million estate, the house investments, and Grandpa's life insurance became front-page news in our small town. "Family feud over millions," screamed the Springfield Herald headline, complete with an unflattering photo of me leaving Henry's office. Coworkers suddenly treated me differently. Some offered awkward sympathy, others barely disguised curiosity, and a few avoided me entirely. My supervisor, Dennis, called me into his office the day after the story broke. "This is uncomfortable, Sophia," he began, fidgeting with a paperweight, "but clients are asking questions." Wexler Consulting prides itself on discretion and stability. My personal situation doesn't affect my work. I responded, fighting to keep my voice steady. Nevertheless, until this is resolved, we feel it's best to reassign your client-facing responsibilities. You'll support Brad's team from the back office temporarily. It was a demotion in all but name, tucked away like a shameful secret. That evening, feeling isolated and overwhelmed, I received a text from Amber Wilson, a childhood friend I hadn't spoken with in years. Saw the news. "Remember me, coffee tomorrow?" Meeting Amber at Riverside Cafe brought a brief sense of normalcy until she mentioned seeing my father. "Your dad approached me last week," she said, stirring her latte. "Asked about you and your grandfather." My stomach dropped. What did he want to know? Whether Richard seemed mentally sharp in recent years. If you controlled who visited him. She looked uncomfortable. I told him I hadn't seen either of you in ages, but Sophia. He implied there might be something in it for helpful information. "He tried to bribe you." My voice rose enough that nearby patrons glanced our way. Not explicitly, but the implication was clear. Amber reached for my hand. "You should know they've hired Reynolds. The private investigator." She nodded grimly. "My cousin works at his office. They're digging into everything, your finances, relationships, even college activities, looking for anything they can use." The betrayals multiplied. My neighbor reported someone asking questions about unusual visitors to Grandpa's house. A former college classmate forwarded an email from my father requesting confidential information about Sophia's character. Most disturbingly, Nurse Katie called upset after being approached outside her apartment. "Some man offered me $5,000 for evidence of cognitive decline in Richard," she reported indignantly. "Said I could remain anonymous. I told him exactly where he could stick his money." Even Michael's steady support began showing cracks. His parents, initially warm, became distant after reading about the lawsuit. "They're worried about the drama," he admitted reluctantly during a tense dinner at my apartment. "Mom asked if you might be more like your parents than you realize." "What does that mean?" I demanded, setting down my fork. "They're concerned about the money," he said carefully. "Whether it's healthy for our relationship." "Our relationship," I echoed. "So suddenly this inheritance defines me. I didn't even want it." I know that Michael insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. "But $2 million changes things. You can't pretend it doesn't." I pulled away, hurt and angry. "I thought you knew me better than that." Though Michael apologized, repeatedly something had shifted between us. The lawsuit had cast its shadow over even this most personal relationship. 2 months into the legal battle, I discovered my parents' attorney was Gregory Taylor, my father's cousin whom I'd never met. The family connection explained how they'd secured representation despite their history of financial irresponsibility. Their legal strategy became clear: depict me as a manipulative gold digger while portraying themselves as misunderstood victims of circumstance who deserved a second chance. The financial strain mounted quickly. Henry, though charging below his usual rate out of respect for Grandpa Richard, still required substantial retainers. My savings dwindled as legal motions and counter-motions accumulated. One evening, returning home exhausted from another meeting with Henry, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. Heart-pounding, I called police before entering. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, but drawers stood open, papers disturbed. Most alarmingly, Grandpa's letter was missing from my bedside table. The responding officers took a report, but warned me that without evidence of forced entry or witnesses, investigation options were limited. Probably Kids 1 suggested, though we both knew better. That night, too frightened to stay alone, I called Michael, who arrived within 20 minutes. As he checked windows and installed a new deadbolt, my phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. "Settlements can be arranged. Trial equals public record. Every family has secrets." I showed Michael, who insisted on staying overnight on my couch. "This has gone too far," he said, voice tight with anger. "They're trying to intimidate you." The following week brought fresh humiliation. A local news website published an article featuring exclusive interviews with the parents of Sophia Taylor, complete with childhood photos I'd never seen, and quotes portraying them as heartbroken over systematic alienation from their only child. The comments section filled with opinions from strangers who knew nothing of my life. Money changes people. Blood is thicker than water. She should share with her parents. That's what family does. Pressure mounted from unexpected directions. My landlord coincidentally decided not to renew my lease. A client at work mentioned hearing concerning things about your situation before requesting a different advisor. Even some church members who had known Grandpa for decades began questioning whether his final wishes might have been confused. During this darkening period, Henry arranged a settlement conference with my parents' attorney. Though hesitant, I agreed to hear their proposal. In the sterile conference room, Gregory Taylor laid out their offer 60/40 split, in their favor with my parents receiving the house and liquid assets while I would get the investment portfolio. "This is generous," he insisted. "Consider the emotional toll of a public trial, all your private business exposed." Henry began his measured rejection when my father interrupted. "You owe us this, Sophia," he said, his first direct words to me in months of legal maneuvering. "We gave you life." Something snapped inside me. "And Grandpa Richard gave me everything else," I replied, rising from my chair. "You gave up any claim to his estate when you gave up your daughter. We're done here." That night, unable to sleep, I wandered through Grandpa's house where I'd been staying since the apartment break-in. In his study, I began organizing his papers, a task I'd been avoiding out of grief. Behind his desk reference books, I discovered a locked metal box I'd never seen before. The key was on his old key ring, labeled Simply Records. Inside lay a journal bound in worn leather, its pages filled with Grandpa's precise handwriting. The entries dated back 15 years, each meticulously documenting interactions with my parents. The 12th of October, 2009, James called requesting $25,000 for business opportunity. Refused. Reminded him Sophia's college fund is untouchable. The 3rd of March 2010, James and Rachel appeared unannounced. Demanded loan of $30,000. When refused, James threatened to contest will when the time comes. Informed him my estate planning is none of his concern. The 17th of August, 2013. Anonymous call warning that James has significant gambling debts to dangerous people. Confirmed through Detective Wilson. No contact from James directly. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, chilled me. November 30, received call from James. Asked pointed questions about my health medications. Inquired about changes to the will since Martha's passing. Clear financial motivation. Have updated video will with Henry to address anticipated challenges. Sophia must be protected at all costs. Tears streamed down my face as I realized Grandpa had anticipated everything had been protecting me, even as he prepared to leave this world. The journal was a gift beyond measure, documented evidence of my parents' true motivations spanning years. With shaking hands, I called Henry, despite the late hour. "I found something you need to see," I said, newfound determination steadying my voice. "I think Grandpa left us exactly what we need." For the first time since the lawsuit began, I felt Grandpa's presence not in grief, but in strength. The tide was about to turn. The day of trial arrived with early summer heat that seemed to shimmer above the courthouse steps. Inside, the air conditioning provided physical relief, but couldn't touch the cold anxiety gripping my chest. Henry had prepared me extensively for this day, but nothing could fully ready me for facing my parents across a courtroom. "Remember," Henry murmured as we waited for proceedings to begin, "Judge Harmon is known for her thoroughness. She'll see through performances to facts." My parents entered with their attorney, my mother in a conservative navy dress that screamed respectable matron, my father wearing glasses I'd never seen before, presumably to appear more intellectual and trustworthy. They didn't look in my direction. The court officer called us to order, and the battle for Grandpa Richard's legacy formally began. Their strategy unfolded precisely as Henry had predicted. My parents portrayed themselves as victims of circumstance, a young couple overwhelmed by financial hardship who had made the heartbreaking but temporary decision to leave me with my grandparents while they stabilized their situation. We never intended it to be permanent, my mother testified, dabbing at non-existent tears. But every time we tried to reconnect, we were pushed away. By whom? Prompted their attorney. At first, by Richard and Martha. Later by Sophia herself, she replied, casting a wounded glance in my direction. My father described alleged attempts to visit throughout my childhood, each supposedly thwarted by Grandpa. He claimed they'd sent regular child support payments, a blatant lie contradicted by court records from my grandparents' custody filing. Their attorney presented photographs of birthday cards allegedly sent but returned unopened, though the postmarks were suspiciously crisp for items supposedly mailed decades ago. They produced phone records showing calls to Grandpa's number during my high school years, conveniently omitting that these calls had been demands for money, not attempts at reconciliation. Most disturbingly, they introduced testimony from Dr. Robert Jennings, a psychiatrist who had never met Grandpa but who confidently pronounced him likely suffering cognitive decline, consistent with susceptibility to undue influence, based solely on reviewing medical records. Throughout their presentation, I maintained the composed demeanor Henry had counseled, though inside I seethed at each fabrication. The worst moment came during my father's direct examination. "Did you abandon your daughter, Mr. Taylor?" their attorney asked. "Never," my father replied emphatically. "We entrusted her to my parents temporarily while getting back on our feet. We always intended to reunite our family. By the time we were financially stable, Richard had poisoned Sophia against us. It broke our hearts. During a court recess, I stepped into the hallway for air, only to find myself face to face with my mother. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You know none of this is true," I finally said quietly. Something flickered in her eyes, shame perhaps, or simply calculation. "James believes it is." "And you?" She glanced toward the courtroom where my father was conversing with their attorney. "It doesn't matter what I believe. We deserve something after all these years." "For what?" I asked, incredulously. "For leaving. For missing every important moment of my life. For showing up only when there's money involved." She had no answer, simply walked away. When court resumed, our counteroffensive began. Henry methodically dismantled their narrative, introducing Grandpa's journal with its documented history of my parents' financial motivations. He presented the original custody filing, showing they had failed to appear and waived all parental rights. Most devastatingly, he introduced financial records Henry had subpoenaed, showing my parents' multiple bankruptcies, fraud allegations, and current mounting debts, including $180,000 owed to a Las Vegas casino. "This case isn't about family reconciliation," Henry told the judge. "It's about desperate people seeking a financial windfall they did nothing to earn and don't legally deserve." When I finally took the stand, I spoke from the heart about Grandpa Richard's unwavering care, his mental acuity until his final days, and his explicit wishes regarding his estate. I described the grandparents who had stepped in when my parents stepped out, who had attended every school event, nursed every fever, celebrated every achievement, large and small. During cross-examination, their attorney tried to portray me as calculating and cold. "Isn't it true you controlled who could visit your grandfather during his final years?" he demanded. "Grandpa made his own decisions," I replied calmly. "The only people he refused to see were those asking for money rather than relationship." The attorney then produced photos, me at college, parties me with Michael at the beach, me laughing with coworkers at a restaurant. "You seem to be enjoying life, despite claiming to be devoted to your ailing grandfather's care," he suggested snidely. "I had a life because Grandpa insisted on it," I responded. "He wanted me to experience joy and normalcy unlike my early childhood." For 3 grueling days, the battle continued. Expert witnesses testified about Grandpa's mental capacity. Family friends confirmed his consistent statements about providing for me. Nurse Katie passionately defended both his cognitive clarity and my dedicated care. As the trial neared conclusion, I felt cautiously optimistic until my parents' attorney played his final card. A surprise witness named Thomas Bradford, a former colleague of Grandpa's who claimed I had prevented him from visiting during Grandpa's final months. Richard wanted to reconcile with his son Bradford, testified. Sophia intercepted his calls and manipulated an elderly man's confusion. It was a complete fabrication. I had never met this man, let alone blocked his visits, but he delivered the lie with convincing sincerity. Henry's cross-examination revealed Bradford had declared bankruptcy the previous year and recently purchased a new vehicle he couldn't explain, affording strongly suggesting payment for testimony. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The trial concluded with closing arguments, Judge Harmon promising a ruling within 2 weeks. I left the courthouse exhausted and demoralized, the strain of the proceedings having taken a physical and emotional toll I could no longer disguise. The following day brought the final devastating blow. Michael, who had attended each day of trial despite growing tension between us, arrived at Grandpa's house with a pained expression. "I can't do this anymore, Sophia," he said, standing awkwardly in the entryway, refusing my invitation to sit. "The drama, the uncertainty, it's too much." "The trial's over," I reminded him. "We just need the ruling." "It's not just the trial. It's everything this situation has stirred up." He couldn't meet my eyes. "My parents are pressuring me. My job is suffering because I'm distracted. I care about you, but I need stability." Just like that, the relationship I had believed would survive anything crumbled. Michael left with promises to check in after things settle, but we both recognized the hollow politeness of his words. That night alone in Grandpa's house, the home that held my only happy childhood memories but might soon be taken from me, I hit rock bottom. My career was damaged, my relationship over my reputation in the community tarnished by public scandal. The financial strain of legal fees had depleted my savings. Even if I won, what remained of my life in Springfield was poisoned by mistrust and rumor. A text arrived from Henry Opposition has offered revised settlement. 60/40 split in your favor. They're worried. The temptation to accept was overwhelming. End this nightmare. Take the majority share and walk away. Start fresh somewhere else. I poured a glass of Grandpa's favorite bourbon, something I'd never acquired a taste for, and wandered through the quiet house. In his study surrounded by books and mementos of his life, I noticed a leather-bound volume I hadn't seen before on a high shelf. Standing on a chair to reach it, I discovered another journal, this one much older. Inside the cover was written for Sophia when she needs to remember who she is. The journal contained entries from the early days after my parents left Grandpa's private thoughts about becoming a parent again in his 60s, his worries about providing properly for a traumatized child, his fierce determination that I would never feel unwanted again. One entry from when I was 5 stopped me cold. James called demanding money again. When refused, he threatened to return and take Sophia back, not because he wants her, but because he knows she's precious to us. I've hired an attorney to protect her. No price is too high to keep her safe. Martha says I'm becoming paranoid, but I've seen the predatory look in my son's eyes. He views people as commodities, resources to be used. Sophia will never be a pawn in his games, not while I draw breath. I closed the journal, suddenly understanding the true nature of my inheritance, not just money, but the unwavering protection and love of a man who had recognized the wolves circling his family and stood guard until his final day. In that moment of clarity, I made my decision. Settlement was unthinkable. Not because of the money, but because accepting it would betray everything Grandpa Richard had fought to protect. He hadn't raised me to take the easy path, but the right one. I texted Henry back, no settlement. We see this through. Grandpa didn't raise me to surrender to blackmail. His response came immediately. That's my girl. Get some rest. Tomorrow we fight. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully, the weight of indecision lifted. Whatever Judge Harmon decided, I would know I had honored the man who gave me everything when my own parents gave me nothing. The courthouse looked different on ruling day, less intimidating somehow. Perhaps facing your worst fears diminishes their power, or perhaps I had simply run out of energy to be afraid. Whatever the reason, I entered with a strange, calm Henry's reassuring presence beside me. My parents and their attorney arrived looking considerably less confident than during the trial. The dark circles under my father's eyes and my mother's tense expression suggested they'd received concerning feedback about their chances. Judge Caroline Harmon, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance of courtroom games, entered precisely at 9 o'clock. The room fell silent as she arranged her papers, then looked up to address us directly. This court has reviewed extensive testimony and evidence regarding the estate of Richard Allen Taylor, she began. Cases involving family disputes over inheritance are always troubling, but rarely have I encountered one where the motivations of the challenging parties were so transparently self-serving. My father shifted uncomfortably as she continued. The journal maintained by the deceased provides compelling, contemporaneous documentation of a pattern of behavior by James and Rachel Taylor consistent with financial opportunism rather than genuine familial concern. She systematically addressed each claim my parents had made, dismantling them with references to specific evidence and testimony. When she reached their allegations about Grandpa's mental capacity, her tone sharpened. The court finds Dr. Jennings' assessment not only speculative but professionally irresponsible given his failure to ever examine the deceased. Nurse Catherine Johnson's daily observations and detailed notes provide far more credible evidence of Richard Taylor's cognitive clarity and decision-making capacity. My heart began to lift as she approached her conclusion. Therefore, this court upholds the will of Richard Allen Taylor in its entirety. All assets are to be transferred to Sophia Elizabeth Taylor, as specified in the original document. She paused, looking directly at my parents. Furthermore, the court finds this challenge was brought in bad faith, without substantial justification, and with intent to harass. The plaintiffs are hereby ordered to pay the defendants' legal fees in full. Motion for sanctions against Attorney Gregory Taylor for introducing testimony from Thomas Bradford without proper verification will be addressed in a separate hearing. The gavel struck with finality, and just like that, the nightmare was over. Henry squeezed my hand under the table as tears of relief filled my eyes. My parents' reaction was immediate and ugly. My father stood abruptly, face contorted with rage. "This is a travesty. He was my father," his shout echoed through the courtroom. Mr. Taylor, Judge Harmon's voice cracked like a whip. "Control yourself, or be held in contempt." Court security moved toward him as my mother pulled urgently at his arm. With a final glare in my direction, they stormed from the courtroom, their attorney trailing behind with a defeated expression. In the courthouse hallway, they blocked my path one final time. "You've stolen what's rightfully ours," my father spat security hovering nearby. For years, I had imagined what I might say if given the chance to confront them. Now, standing before the man and woman who had walked away from their 4-year-old daughter, I found unexpected clarity. "Family isn't about DNA or legal rights," I said calmly. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves without conditions or expectations of return. Grandpa Richard and Grandma Martha were my real parents in every way that matters." "You ungrateful," my father began, but my mother pulled him away as a security officer approached. I watched them leave, realizing I felt nothing, not anger, not vindication, not even relief. They were simply strangers now, their power to hurt me finally completely gone. The next weeks brought rapid changes. With the lawsuit resolved, I returned to Wexler Consulting, only to find myself unexpectedly offered a position heading their new office in Denver. My boss, Dennis, who had earlier sidelined me, now seemed eager to demonstrate the company's confidence in me. "Fresh start, bigger market," he enthused. "You've proven your resilience and judgment under extreme pressure. That's exactly what we need in a branch manager." The timing felt providential. Springfield held too many painful memories now. Denver offered anonymity and opportunity without completely uprooting my life. As I began preparations to sell Grandpa's house, Nurse Katie approached me with an unexpected proposal. "That foundation you mentioned starting for kids like you were, I'd like to help run it. During the darkest days of the lawsuit, I had shared with Katie my dream of creating a foundation in Grandpa's name to support children affected by parental abandonment. Now, with the inheritance secure, it could become reality. You're serious? You'd leave nursing? For this, absolutely. Her eyes shone with conviction. Richard talked about it too, you know. He said your compassion was your greatest inheritance from him. Within a month, the Richard and Martha Taylor Foundation was incorporated with an initial endowment of $500,000. Katie as its first executive director and a mission to provide stability and educational support for children in disrupted family situations. Preparing to leave Springfield proved emotionally complex. Grandpa's house, my childhood home, needed to be sold, requiring me to sort through decades of accumulated memories. Some items were donated, others packed for my new home in Denver. Grandpa's journals and Martha's recipe books came with me. The antique Mustang we had restored together went to Henry's son, who promised to maintain it with the same care we had shown. The day before my scheduled departure, I visited the cemetery where Grandpa and Grandma now rested side by side. I placed fresh flowers and sat on the small bench nearby. I kept my promise, I told them softly. The wolves didn't win. That evening, I wrote a letter to my parents, not seeking reconciliation but offering forgiveness for my own peace. I release you from whatever obligation you may feel toward me, and I release myself from any expectation of the parents you couldn't be. I wish you healing and peace. I mailed it with their portion of Grandpa's photographs and left no forwarding address. Whether they responded or not no longer mattered to my journey forward. Denver welcomed me with mountain vistas and anonymity. My new apartment, purchased outright thanks to Grandpa's inheritance, offered views of the Rockies and space to build a life on my own terms. Within weeks, I had established a routine, challenging work at the growing branch office volunteer time with a local mentoring program and regular video calls with Katie about foundation business. 6 months after the move, I met with a financial advisor recommended by Henry to develop a long-term plan for the inheritance. Your grandfather built quite a legacy, she observed, reviewing the portfolio, and you're continuing it thoughtfully. Many people who receive sudden wealth make impulsive decisions they later regret. I had a good teacher, I replied, thinking of all the financial lessons Grandpa had shared during our kitchen table sessions. He taught me wealth is responsibility as much as opportunity. As we finalized the investment strategy, conservative growth, regular contributions to the foundation provisions for my eventual retirement, I felt Grandpa's approving presence. I had become the steward he trusted me to be, not just of his money, but of his values. Walking home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The abandoned 4-year-old waiting by the window. The grieving teenager losing her grandmother. The young woman holding her grandfather's hand as he departed this world. The defendant fighting for justice. All these versions of myself had led to this moment, scarred but stronger, standing firmly on the foundation of love that had been my true inheritance all along. In my pocket, I carried Grandpa's pocket watch, its steady ticking a reminder that time moves only forward. The past had shaped but would not define me. The future stretched open with possibility. Some people build their lives taking from others, I whispered, to the mountain sunset, remembering Grandpa's wisdom. I'll build mine, giving back. In the distance, I could almost hear his voice. You were always rich in the ways that matter, Sophia. Always. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family who only showed up when there was something to gain? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found meaning in my journey, please subscribe and share this video with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth. Remember, family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's built by those who choose to stay when others walk away. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember that your value was never determined by those who couldn't see it.